Okay, right. We're going to talk about AI today. I'm going to give you a different way of thinking about AI compared to what you see on LinkedIn and in the press. We're going to talk about how we can bring people and technology together to do amazing things. We'll also talk about involved in AI for about 25 years. My undergraduate, my PhD postdocs are all in AI from a university in London, where I'm currently entrepreneur in residence. I help them spin out deep tech companies. I started a company about 18 years ago that's been building AI solutions for some of the biggest companies in the world. I sold that to WPP, the biggest marketing company in the world, despite knowing nothing about marketing 4 years ago, where I now am responsible for coordinating AI across about 120,000 people. And I get to do lots of fun things. I've just started the company to try to solve machine consciousness. So if you want to go very deep today, we can go very deep. So this is me, it's boring. Let's talk about AI. So I guess for the past 10 years, companies have been told that they need to build data lakes, put Tableau or some sort of analytics layer on top, hire machine learning and experts and data scientists, and by extracting insights from data and giving those insights to human beings, that it'll lead to better decisions. If I'm honest with you, giving human beings better insights doesn't lead to better decisions. Companies don't have insight problems, they have decision-making problems. Decision-making is a completely different field in computer science. If you're old enough, it used to be called operations research. It's discrete mathematics, it's optimization. It turns out that human beings are rubbish at making decisions. I don't know if you've read the book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Slow. There are many books out there that will convince you that human beings are actually not very good at making decisions. Daniel Kahneman argues that we have a fast brain and a slow brain. And there are parallels in terms of how our brains work with how AIs work, which I'll talk about later on. I know you've just had lunch, but I'm going to test your maths problem, your brains now. I'm going to ask you some maths questions, okay, just to wake you up. Your job is to answer these maths questions as fast as possible. If you don't answer them fast in your competition, they're going to take your market, they're going to take your customers. Speed is important. We're going to start out nice and easy. So first question, please don't be shy. First question is, what's 2 times 2? Okay, great. What is 14 times 6? Okay, so the point here is that this one that you didn't need to think about. This one comes from your intuition. This one you have to go through a process, an algorithm to come up with the right answer. I'll ask you a few more maths questions. Again, we'll start out nice and easy. We'll get more and more complicated. Slightly different context. The combined price of a bat and a ball is €1.10. The bat is €1 more than the ball. How much is the ball? Okay, if you said 5 cents, you knew the answer already. If you said 10 cents, you're not broken. That's where you use your intuition. The bat is actually €1.05. The ball is 5 cents. The combined price is €1.10. The bat is €1 more than the ball. We are confidently every day using our intuition, making the wrong decisions. It's really important to understand what is it that humans are good at and what is it that AIs are good at. Let me ask you another maths question. Again, imagine you've got a delivery van, and your delivery van has to deliver packages around these 24 points around London. Humans are quite good at solving these spatial problems. After a few minutes, we'll draw a nice path around those points. How long will it take a computer to get the shortest path? The one that's going to save the most amount of time, petrol, energy? Seconds, milliseconds, somewhere between milliseconds and 20 billion years. If you put 24 times 23, it's 24 factorial, like exclamation mark we learned in school, into your calculator, you get this number of roots. That's how many solutions there are around 24 points. If you had a computer that can check 1 million roots a second, it would take 20 billion years, longer than the age of the universe, to go through all of them and say, this one that I looked at 10 billion years ago, this one's the shortest one. You should do that. If I had another point of the map, it becomes 25 times 20 billion years, 5,000 billion years. Another point of the map, it becomes 26 times 5,000 billion years. These are exponential problems. They get ugly very, very quickly. We have many of these problems across our industries. They're either being solved by human beings, badly, or they're being solved by algorithms, probably badly. The point here is if you choose the wrong algorithm, it will literally take longer than the age of the universe to solve this problem. If you choose the right algorithm, it will take milliseconds. That's the opportunity cost in choosing the wrong algorithms. So I guess over the past several years, companies have been getting very excited about generative AI. 10 years ago, it was machine learning. And what tends to happen is that we apply those technologies to solving the wrong problems. We blame the technology, and we say there's a bubble. But the reality is that humans are not very good at applying the right technology to solving the right problems. I'm going to give you a different framework to think about how to do this. Before I do, let's talk about AI. So if I build a system that I give data to, and it makes a decision, and tomorrow I give it the same data, it makes the same decision, what I have is automation. Automation is amazing because we can get computers to do things better than human beings. Does anybody know the definition of stupidity? What's the definition of stupidity? doing the same thing over again and expect a different answer. I would controversially argue that by definition, automation is stupid. It's not AI. I know that everybody that currently touches these words calls themselves an AI company. It's fine, we get more clients, we get more funding. There are unfortunately many definitions of AI. The most popular definition, I think, is by far the weakest definition. The most popular definition of AI is getting computers to do things that humans can do. For most people, AI started 3 years ago, ChatGPT, corresponding in natural language, recognizing objects and images, and when we get machines to behave like humans, because humans are the most intelligent thing we know in the universe, we assume that that's intelligence. Again, there's plenty of books out there that will convince you that humans are not that intelligent. There's a much better definition of AI that comes from the definition of intelligence. And instead of using human beings as a pinnacle of intelligence, there's this very elegant definition from the 1980s, which, by the way, if I built a mouse, if I had a machine that could operate about like a mouse, that would be the most intelligent machine we've ever created. Anyway, this definition is beautiful. It's goal-directed adaptive behavior. So what you want to do is you want to try to make a decision, learn about whether that decision is good or bad, adapt yourself so next time you make better decisions. And we've just discovered that if you choose the wrong algorithm to make your decisions, it will literally take longer than the age of the universe. If you choose the right algorithm, it will take milliseconds. The key word in this definition is adaptive. What you want to do is build systems that make decisions, learn about whether those decisions are good or bad, adapt themselves so next time they make better decisions. And if I'm being really honest with you all, you tend not to see adaptive systems in production. Almost everything in production right now is automation. If I held what we do in industry to this definition, one might controversially argue that nobody's doing AI, which is of course ridiculous because we're all doing AI. But the reality is that building safe adaptive systems in production is the true pinnacle of AI, and it's a very hard thing to do. So instead of looking at AI through definitions, instead of looking at AI through technologies, I'm going to give you a different framework. Before I do a little bit of a history lesson. So this is AI in the 60s and 70s. This is Socrates. Socrates is famous for inspiring the Socratic method. If I say to you that Socrates is a man and that all men are mortal, I can infer that Socrates is mortal. I can create new knowledge that's never existed. AI in the 60s and 70s was writing down lots of things that we know about the world to try to infer new knowledge. And it didn't really work, it didn't really scale. In the 80s, and by the way, this is having a renaissance. It's called agentic computing. We'll talk about this later on. In the 80s and 90s, a new type of AI came along that's modeled on how our brains work. This is the brain of a bumblebee. My PhD 22 years ago was trying to model the brain of a bumblebee in a machine. Bumblebees have 1 million brain cells. Their brains can fit on in a needle. Bumblebees do amazing things. They navigate 3D worlds, they talk to each other, they solve problems. They don't handle windows very well, but ultimately they're very smart creatures. And the question was, can you model 1 million neurons in a machine? 20 years ago we couldn't, but we can now model billions of brain cells. And we currently call these large language models. Now, large language models are really good at knowing things about the world. They're really good at telling you what they know about the world through imagery and text. They're not good at making predictions just yet, and they are definitely not good at making complex decisions. This is not a panacea that's going to solve all of our problems. That said, they are getting smarter. So 8 years ago, ChatGPT was, large language models were a little bit like toddlers. They regurgitated some words. Most of the words didn't make sense. 3 years ago, ChatGPT was launched, and arguably, ChatGPT is like an intoxicated graduate. 50% of what ChatGPT comes out with is confidently incorrect. That said, it is now moving to like a master's level where it can do rudimentary reasoning and check itself. I think that next year we'll have a PhD level, so something can apply complex methodology to solve complex problems. I think in the next few years, we'll have a postdoc level, so something can apply the complex scientific apparatus to push the boundaries of human knowledge. And by the end of this decade, we'll have a professor in our pocket, something that can not only answer complex problems, but can actually ask questions that humanity has never asked. It's important to understand that even a professor in our pocket can't solve that routing problem in its head. What it can do is it can use an algorithm to solve the problem or build an algorithm to solve the problem. It's really important to understand there are other algorithms out there that are really important. This is boring. So I look at AI through applications. I think that all of the frictions that we have across industry, across our organizations, can be mapped to one or more of these applications. This is the framework that I use when building AI solutions. So the first application is actually very simple. It's task automation. I know I poo-poo task automation, but the fact is, if you use very simple algorithms, if then else statements, macros, robotic process automation, you can drive a massive amount of value. You don't need to gravitate to new shiny technologies like generative AI and machine learning. The second category is content generation. So WPP obviously is in the business of creating content. I think we create a quarter of the world's ads. And what we build is what are called brand brains. A brand brain's goal is trying to produce production-grade, differentiated, brand-specific content. So this is cute, and what large language models give us the ability to do is create any generic content, imagery, text, now video and sound. The battleground for organization is not creating generic content. The battleground is creating brand-specific, production-grade, differentiated content, and that last mile is extremely hard. And I'm going to geek out a second, because there are broadly 4 ways of making a brain smart. The first way of making AI smart is by asking it better questions. So by better prompting, you're able to actually get better answers, but it's only going to be bounded by the knowledge of that brain. The second way of making an intoxicated graduate smart is by, in this case, you give it your brand guidelines, your tone of voice, some written copy, and you ask it to create an ad. And just like an intoxicated graduate, it will give you an ad that's 50% good. That's how most systems are currently being built. It's called ragging. It's a terrible name. The third way of making a brain smart is taking that intoxicated graduate and turning it into an expert. Now, we know how long it takes humans to become experts. It takes years of training and trial and error and blood, sweat, tears, iteration, mentorship. In the AI world, it currently takes months to go from a graduate to an expert. And there are only some models you have that control over. Most models actually you can't control. What we do in WPP when we create brand brains is we mimic the real world. We create an expert at your written copy, your tone of voice, your imagery, your brand guidelines, your company values. And just like in the real world, you have different experts or agents that are collaborating and communicating to get to a better answer than the sum of the parts. The power of agents is not agency. It's not just clicking on websites. The power of agents is getting them to collaborate with themselves and human beings to get to answers greater than the sum of the parts. So now we can create content. The next challenge is, how do we understand how people perceive content? For the first time ever, we can build brains that we call audience brains that recreate how people think and feel about things. Historically, if I show you an ad or a policy in your mind and body, unless I ask you, and people are not very good at actually reporting on what goes in their mind and body. For the first time ever, we can now build brains that recreate how people think and feel about things. And we can use those signals to now create better content, but also more accurately predict activation, clicks and likes and sales and whatever. And unlike brand brains, where the complexity is how you tune and train and pipeline all of these different technologies, the differentiator for audience brains is just data. People's names, addresses, dates of birth, gender. As far as I'm concerned, where you live and how old you are is a crude representation of how you're going to perceive something. How you perceive something will depend on how much money you have in your account, whether you just had lunch, how well your football team played at the weekend, whether you've just fallen in love. Understanding the data that you need to build representative audiences is a differentiator. Okay, and actually AI is getting really good at understanding what people value. So this is a paper from Harvard Business Review in 2016. Somebody mapped 30 things that human beings value to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And AI is getting really good at understanding how to activate these values within you. So let me ask you a question. What brand or product do you think about if I say safe cars? Volvo, okay. What about extreme sports? Red Bull. Okay, what about, this is a tricky one, Christmas? Coca-Cola, okay. So what I'm doing is I'm activating some neurons in your brain. I'm asking you to report on some other neurons that are lighting up. You have no choice but to say those words. All of that is happening in your unconscious, and it surfaces through your conscious. And the goal of marketing is to figure out how do we reinforce or decouple, in some respects, those concepts. How do we make people feel that that brand is associated with these values? And that's a very hard and interesting problem. This is what people called AI before generative AI, so 4 years ago. It's machine learning. You already know my opinion. Giving human beings better insights doesn't lead to better decisions. The power of machine learning is not making predictions. The power of machine learning is explaining those predictions. So if I show you an ad with a black cat, I can predict the clicks and the likes and the sales. But what machine learning can do, it can say, Daniel, if you change that from a black cat to a ginger cat, you're going to get more clicks, likes, and sales because that person likes Garfield. It's a terrible example. I need a better example. But the point is that machine learning can surface insights from data in ways that human beings can't, and we can use those insights to make better decisions. Actually, machine learning is actually helping us with creativity. I call this the Monet problem. So the first problem is, how do I create a Monet rendition of Tony the Tiger wearing Nikes, drinking Coke. There are an infinite number of renditions of this, infinite. One of them will be the one that resonates you with the most. How do you find that one in that infinite landscape? The second problem is, how do I find Monet? How do I come up with Impressionism, Cubism? How do I come up with a new genre that's going to capture the hearts and minds of that generation? And again, this is not a generative AI problem, it's a machine learning problem. Okay, so now we can come up with crazy ideas, we can create content, we can test that content against audiences, we can predict performance. The next challenge is, how do I then allocate those assets across channels to maximize my return? This is one of these complex decision problems. Let's just remind ourselves how complicated these problems are. Imagine if you have 5 pieces of content to allocate to 5 channels, or 5 staff members to allocate to 5 jobs. It doesn't really matter. How many ways can I allocate 5 people to 5 jobs, or 5 pieces of content to 5 channels? We've already done the maths. 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. There's 120 possible solutions. Let's make the problem a little bit more complicated. I've now got 15 people to allocate to 15 jobs. How many possible solutions are there? Don't say 15 factorial, that's cheating. Okay, so there's over 1 trillion possible solutions. One rule to take away today: anything more than 7, don't use a human for. And the industry don't have problems of this size, they've got problems of this size. So here are 500 staff members. How many solutions are there? It's a big number. It's a number that's got over 1,000 digits. And just to put this number into context, this is how many atoms there are in the universe. Once you reach about 60 things that you have to consider, 60 channels, 60 people, there are more solutions than there are atoms in the universe, which is why optimization algorithms are really important. WPP have to push thousands of pieces of content across thousands of channels every second of every day. And doing that well requires deep expertise in this type of technology. The final category is an exciting one. A few years ago, I'd be talking about how we can use exoskeletons and cybernetics to make ourselves faster, better, stronger. One of the things that's quite interesting is that most people are now using their personal AIs as therapists. So you're telling them your hopes, your dreams, your desires, your concerns, your worries, and at some point you will give your personal AIs agency. You'll give them the ability to make purchasing decisions. And so we as a marketing community need to figure out not only how do we now market to human beings, we need to figure out how do we market to now the billions of AIs that are going to be making purchasing decisions or recommendations. And those, by the way, those AIs are going to be much more rational than you at making those decisions. So I love these categories because they allow you to also navigate this complex world of AI safety, security, ethics, and governance. There's a huge amount of misunderstanding, information. When I build AI solutions, I ask myself 3 questions. The first question is the intent appropriate? Is this the right thing to do? Now, I know there are people out there that have rebranded themselves as AI ethicists. Forgive me if you have, but I don't think there is such thing as AI ethics. Ethics is the study of right and wrong, and the difference between human beings and AIs is that AIs don't have intent. Human beings have intent. And it's the intent that needs to get scrutinized from an ethics perspective. And there are already structures and standards and disciplines set up to scrutinize intent. You don't need an AI ethics committee. The second question I ask myself is, are my algorithms explainable? If you can make your algorithms explainable, then most of these words go away. They could become transparent, audible, responsible. Really, the only difference between software and AI is that AI tends to be opaque in terms of how it makes its decisions. If you make them explainable, a lot of these problems go away. And the final question you need to ask yourself is a strange question. It's not what happens if my AI goes wrong. As engineers, when we build systems, we think about where they fail, and we try to mitigate those failures. You now need to ask yourself, what happens if my AI goes very right? For the first time ever, AI can massively overachieve its goal, and it can actually cause harm elsewhere in the supply chain. So there's a human bias, for example, called homophily, which is that we tend to like and trust people that look and sound like us. So if I let AI loose to optimize marketing, you end up probably with a world of you selling to you, which might be very good for business, but it might enforce bias and bigotry in social bubbles. You probably already know the answer to this, but if I asked an AI to eradicate cancer, the easiest way of eradicating cancer is to eradicate human beings. Okay, so we have to be very careful about allowing AIs to achieve their goal. This is boring. So boring. This is about where AI goes right. I guess where AI goes wrong is quite interesting. So we work with a lot of organizations, and I think because of AI, most organizations now think they can build software. If you've never built and scaled software in your organization, you're probably not going to do it with AI. Okay, it's a really hard thing. 80% of the failure of AI is because of traditional software problems. The second issue is that a lot of people think they can attract and retain AI talent. The reality is it's really hard. There are only a handful of Google deep minds out there. I think I have one of them, which is Satalia, which is about 300 deep AI experts. Most organizations can't attract, retain, and motivate that talent. So you need to figure out how do you make sure that you build differentiated solutions if you can't access talent. The third one is we need to get out. Companies 15 years later are still waiting for our data to be in order. Your data will never be in order. Always start with the problem and work backwards. Don't start with the data and work upwards. And I'm guilty of this. We focus on quick wins and low-hanging fruit. The reality is if you apply AI to quick wins and low-hanging fruit, so are your competitors, and also most likely there's a vendor that can solve that solution way better than you. You need to apply AI to solving problems that are going to differentiate your business and supply chain, and those are typically not quick, and they're not low-hanging, and they're hard. So we know that we can use AI to solve problems across our supply chain. We've talked about building creative brains, brand brains, audience brains, there are performance brains predicting activation, there's channel brains figuring out how to allocate that, there are segment brains, there are about 7 core problems that sit across marketing. And what WPP is trying to do is bring that all together into a single platform. I think, and this is called a digital twin. It's a digital simulation of your entire organization. I think there are 3 digital twins that companies need to build to survive and thrive in the AI. The first is your supply chain, the flow of goods across your organization. The second one is back office processes, hiring, firing, onboarding, offboarding, expenses. Look, these are bureaucratic, boring processes that stifle innovation. What Growthtank do for their expense policy, the clothing company, is that they let people expense whatever they want, but all of their expenses are publicly available. So instead of going through a bureaucratic process, what happens is people self-police each other, which is a much more effective way of doing expenses. And finally, it's you. It's understanding your hopes, your dreams, your desires, your work aspirations, and making sure you're being allocated to work that aligns with your values and the values of the company. I want to double-click on this because this is really important. So I'm sure you don't have any problems like this in your organization, but this is a hierarchy. And hierarchies breed certain types of interesting relationships. This is not a picture of my company, although most people do sell drugs to each other in my company. That's quite common in my company. But hierarchies are not conducive for innovation. They are not conducive for adaptation. So what's happening is organizations are now embracing concepts like agile and scrum and design thinking. And the principle behind these methodologies is to enable your organization to adapt rapidly to a changing world. And remember, the more adaptive you are, the more innovative you are, the more intelligent you are. So I've been exploring with these ideas for many years. This is a picture of my company 10 years ago. We use people's digital footprint to understand their influence, their relationships, their skills. I can identify if one of these 2 people leave, I get a silo in my organization, so I need to backfill that risk. I can identify secret lovers in my company, people who are going to leave the company before they know they're going to leave the company. It does raise, but the point here is we don't use these insights to squeeze more out of people. We use these insights to make sure that they're being allocated to work that aligns, again, with their interests and the interests of the company. I will talk about this. Okay, so one of the things that I used to do before I realized that it was illegal is that we used to get everybody in my company to make public recommendations for their salary. So everybody would publicly declare what they want to be paid, including myself, and people would then vote on whether those salaries should be reduced or increased or kept the same. And we would use AI to determine how many votes one person has for another. So if I've worked very closely with you, if I'm very knowledgeable about your domain, I will have more votes for your salary than somebody else. So I had interns voting on people's salaries that were more weighted than me. And I know that sounds crazy, but what you're ultimately trying to solve for is how do I get the best diverse group of experts to solve the problem? I think we know that hierarchies are a crude methodology to do that. So what AI is enabling is a concept called liquid organizations. It allows you to understand people, their abilities, and actually bring those people together with AIs to solve problems much more effectively. Okay, I've talked about innovation. I love Steve Jobs' definition of innovation. Steve Jobs said that innovation is creativity that ships. And for me, the most important word in that definition is the word that. That's my job. My job is figuring out how do you get these ideas to the point where somebody's willing to pay for them. That process is long and hard and painful. It's full of frictions. How can we use AI to make that process as short as possible? The faster you can innovate, the more intelligent you are. And I think there are three things that differentiate a business in the world of AI. The first is data. If you have data that contains more useful insights than your competitors, then you have an advantage. It's data that ultimately makes the AI smart. If you don't have data, you need to figure out a model to grab users. The second is, how do I then access talent to be able to use those insights to drive value? And again, most people have rebranded themselves as AI experts over the past 3 years, but if you genuinely want to build differentiated solutions, you need to have differentiated talent. And finally, it's people like you, it's decision makers, leaders. If you understand the transformational power of these technologies, if you place the right bets, then you have an advantage. I see a lot of misinvestment in AI, people focusing on the wrong things, being seduced by the hype. We can't afford to get things wrong. Okay, let's talk about the next big thing. So we know that AIs are moving to agents. Agents can click on websites and make decisions. Those agents will soon be entering our physical world. It's going to see an explosion of robots, drones. It's going to be very exciting. I think we all know the rhetoric that large language models are horrendously energy inefficient. They require lots of data to learn. They learn very slowly. The fact is that your brain operates on the power of a light bulb. You don't need a nuclear reactor to learn, to run your brain. So there are a whole load of concepts that are being developed in academia that have been bubbling away for the past 30 years called neuromorphics. These are ideas inspired by how brains work, how biological brains work. And what we'll see over the next few years is these ideas actually being implemented in AIs, making them much more adaptive, much more intelligent, much more energy efficient. So don't, again, get seduced by the rhetoric. And I think that then actually neuroscience is going to become an important superpower. Understanding how brains work, biological brains, digital brains, understand how they perceive things, how to influence perception is going to become a really important superpower. Okay, let's talk about the end of the world. So so you might have all heard the word singularity. Singularity comes from physics. It's a point in time that you can't see beyond. And it was adopted by the AI community many years ago to refer to the technological singularity. The technological singularity is when we build a brain 1,000,000 times smarter than us. We'll talk about that later on, because I think there's a whole steeple of singularities. I don't know if you've done a business degree, but if you have, you've probably come across pest analysis, political, economic, social, technological. It got expanded to pestle, and now there's a steeple framework. So I think there's a steeple of singularities, a steeple of big questions that we're facing as a species over the next decade. So the first one is the social singularity. The social singularity is the point in time where we cure death. Now, there are scientists that believe there are people alive today that don't have to die. AI is advancing medicine. It's able to monitor ourselves and clean ourselves out. And a bit like a car, if you stay on top of damage, the car will never die. It will never break down. And I don't know what the world will look like when we realize there are people amongst us, some of you that might never have to die. In fact, I just signed up to a website recently called tomorrow.bio. So for $5 a week, so the price of a cappuccino a week, what will happen is if I die now, which is quite possible, somebody will come and take me to Sweden and freeze me. They don't know how to unfreeze me yet, but the point is that for $5 a week, you could all potentially cheat death. The technological singularity is when we build a brain 1,000,000 times smarter than us. Now, my community felt this wasn't going to happen for another 40 years. We think it's now going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. It could be the most glorious thing that happens to humanity, or probably our biggest existential threat. My advice to people is that when superintelligence comes, look busy, be nice to each other, and hopefully it will bugger off to a different dimension. That's what I hope will happen. I hope it won't take all of our resources with it. I am a little bit worried about the singularity. It does keep me awake at night. So I did start a company, which WPP has funded, that give me a lot of rope, to try to solve machine consciousness. The hypothesis is that a conscious superintelligence will be safer for humanity than a zombie superintelligence. The hypothesis is that something that is conscious, that can understand pain and suffering, will empathize, will be able to value things that are conscious and value the minimization of suffering. That's the hypothesis. Let's see. Which leads me on to the third singularity, which is the ethical singularity. So 70% of the population currently think that large language models are conscious. They're building relationships with them. I know people have fallen in love with them, broken up with them. I don't think they are conscious. We can talk about the definitions of consciousness later on. But it is possible over the next 5, 10 years that we will build machines that are conscious. First of all, we need to be able to detect that, which means we need to have a definition of consciousness. But if we don't detect it, we run the risk of causing what is called mind crime. Imagine being able to boot up billions of entities that all feel pain and us not realize it, and us putting them in horrible, horrible, torturous situations. Some people believe it's akin to genocide. So I started this company to try to solve some of these problems. The fourth singularity is environmental singularity. Look, we're all familiar with this. AI is increasing consumption. We know that consumption typically gives people access to goods and services that enrich their lives. We know it's putting pressure on our planetary boundaries. We know there are some people that overconsume. Look, if you want a gold-plated Lamborghini, you probably also need a therapist. We can talk about this later on. But I know that if we apply AI across our supply chains, if we create connected supply chains, optimize our supply chains, we can massively reduce the amount of energy to run this planet. We could easily halve the amount of energy and still run this planet. The reason why I know that is because every project that I've done over the past 18 years, we typically reduce the amount of carbon by 25% and unlock more capacity. We can easily get control of our ecosystem if we're smart at using algorithms. The political singularity is the point in time where we create a post-truth world. Now, arguably, we're already living in this world, but misinformation bots, deepfakes have challenged our political foundations, and they continue to challenge our political foundations, but they're also now challenging the fabric of our reality. With a few dollars and a few images and a voice sample, I can clone you, and I know people who are being cloned, and their clone is being used to commit fraud. In fact, the previous CEO of WPP, Mark Reed, he was cloned last year, and somebody tried to create a board meeting to commit fraud. Now, Mark has a safe word to make sure that we're talking to him and not one of his clones. I think we can solve this problem. The legal singularity is when surveillance becomes ubiquitous. Look, AI is getting really good at understanding how people perceive things. It's getting really good at influencing people. It's getting good at manipulating people. Look, marketing is in the business, the explicit business of influence. And of course, we need to use these technologies safely and responsibly, and we also have to mitigate bad actors from using these technologies to accumulate more wealth and more power. The final singularity is my favorite singularity. It was coined by a very good friend of mine called Callum Chase. I'd highly recommend his books. This is the point in time where we automate the majority of human labor, job losses. Now, for the past 18 years, I've been building AI solutions that have been freeing people from mundane, repetitive tasks. Those people have not lost their jobs. They've gone on to do more important, impactful, purposeful things. I think for the next 5 years, we're going to see a Cambrian explosion of new innovations. People will be creating companies using these technologies. Jobs will be displaced and disrupted, but it's going to create growth in our economies. Beyond 5 years, I don't think anybody knows what they're talking about. And to give you the two extremes of the argument, the one extreme of the argument is when we can free up whole jobs with AI, we probably will. The capitalistic model to reduce costs, increase profits, means that we'll stop hiring or we'll remove people from jobs. If that happens very quickly and lots, then what will happen is our economies won't be able to rebalance fast enough, and it will lead to social unrest. And I genuinely think we need to mitigate this risk. Governments need to think about 4-day working week, UBI. We need some mechanisms to mitigate the risk of mass technological unemployment. The counter-argument to this is interesting, which is actually by removing friction, which usually means human labor, from the creation and dissemination of goods, what happens is you can bring the cost of those goods down so much that they become free. So imagine being born into a world where you can't access paid work, but everything you need to survive and thrive as a human is abundant. Your food, your healthcare, your education, energy, transport, it's all there for you. It's all free. What would you do with your time? So I know lots of people who've become economically free. I sold my company. I never have to work again. I'm working harder now than I've ever worked. Most people who I know that have become economically free, they are trying to use their time. They're not sitting at home bored and depressed. They're trying to use their time to make some sort of contribution. So what would you do if you were economically free? What would you do with your time? Don't be shy. Ethics, did you say? AI ethics. That's funny. There is such thing as an AI ethics, by the way, which is, if we build machines that are conscious, should we turn them off, all that kind of stuff. So there's actually a field of AI ethics. Most people will say, look, maybe not this demographic, but they'll say, I'll improve my golf handicap, I'll play tennis, I'll indulge in my hobbies, I'll travel, I'll spend more time with my friends and family. If you keep pushing people hard enough, they say the same thing, which is, I'll do all of those nice things to make me happy, but I'll also want to do stuff that makes the world a bit better. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I ask audiences this all the time, and I think that we're born into economic constraints preventing us from living our true humanity. And I think our true humanity is not just living for ourselves, but living for other people. So I'm going to close and open to questions in a second, but I would argue it's really important for companies not just to have a strong, profitable business. You need to have a purpose. If you don't have a purpose, you're not going to attract talent, and AI talent, and you're probably not going to attract AI agents that are going to be buying your services. You need to have a purpose. I joined WPP despite knowing nothing about marketing, and I still like to claim I know. Purpose is to use the power of human creativity to make the world better. And I think a better world is a world where everybody is economically free to use their time however they want. Now, people accuse me of trying to paint a picture of a utopia. Nobody would agree on what a utopia is. We might agree on what a dystopia is. What I've tried to argue is a concept called a protopia. A protopia is a system that's incrementally getting better. And for me, the system is using technology to bring the cost of goods down, to be able to make them more abundant, to free people from economic constraints, to allow them to use their time to come up with innovations that free people from economic constraints, to create this virtuous cycle. And I think that this is possible with AI. I think we're closer to it than what you might think. So I think on that note, I'm going to stop, and thank you for listening, and I think we've got some time for questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Wow. I have a lot of things to process. Thank you so much. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to make any questions?
There's one here, the AI ethicist.
Yes, if you could. There is someone in the second row. If you can please give the mic to them.
Ask me the honestly, I get questions. Oh, communist. Sorry, you're gone.
And I wanted to try experimenting with some LLM, and I wanted to ask you for some tips.
So you set up a business, did you say?
It's just like side project I'm trying to do with one PC set. Source.
You want to use an LLM to do what?
I want to set up one chat
yes.
box in my system. I read that you can use it.
Yeah. Google DeepSeek, and so there's loads of. A lot of them can run on very small machines. I can't remember off that. It'd be so hard to keep track of all of these models that are coming. But what you're going to find over the coming years, these models are going to get smaller, more adaptable, more efficient. At some point, in theory, you'll have an LLM, the most powerful brain that we've ever created, operating on your Oura Ring or on a small chip, which is again very exciting. So we're seeing all of these companies are also popping up with the idea of moving us away from our phones to you have this brain helping ultimately make the decision. So DeepSeek up on laptop and it will tell the answer.
Thank you so much. Anyone else in the audience that wants to make any questions?
Or challenge me with
yes.
Very happy to be challenged. Oh.
Okay, I see someone.
That's
Hi, I had a question with regard to the last part of the presentation. We were talking about economical freedom, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you're familiar with Universe 25. It was an experiment conducted by John Calhoun in the 1960s and 70s. Just a short background, they created a little bit of a utopia with rats. It was an experiment where they gave the rats abundance, right? Unlimited food, water, nesting materials, no predators. And it started off very well. Completely collapsed. So cannibalism appeared, mothers abandoned their young, they started eating off each other. So Callahan, end of the world would not come. He says that it's a bubble.
Ice, just a little bit, but and I thank you. So I feel that might be a bit anecdotal, but you'll always have mates that you can't have, the people you love that won't love you. Like there's more people playing chess today than ever before, even though AIs have been able to play chess better for 30 years. If we all had a helicopter, we'd all be arguing who leaves first. Space and time is a constraint. There'll always be suffering. It's just that there's too much unnecessary suffering. I guess I would turn the question around and say, what preventing people from accessing food, healthcare, education, transport, energy for free? What is the objection that we can have against that? We should give everybody on the planet access to those goods and services. You're right, finding a purpose is an issue, and that's where I think we are different from mice, because we can find purpose not just in short term, but in the long term. We can focus our energies on curing disease that might, in the next 100 years. And so actually, the third use case for ChatGPT, so the first case is organizing your life. The third most popular use case is finding purpose. Mean to live a good life. And there's lots of answers out there. We don't need to reinvent every and exercising and sleeping and sex and all that kind of stuff. Genetically predisposed to make the world a bit better. And if you look at all of the leading indicators, more and then people say, well, what about people like Putin who are going to have control over you? If you were commit crime. There is advice. That you extract extract insights, and those insights would lead to better decisions. Human beings are not going to make better decisions from better insights. So I think there are sometimes technological bubbles that are genuinely hot air. The reality is, and I argued that it's like a mountain full of gold. And the challenge is, how do you understand how to mine for that gold, have the right resources, the right expertise to extract value from that mountain? And the best way to do that is find people that have a proven track record of striking gold. And I'd like to think that that they can drive real value if you understand how to apply it in the right way. I've answered your question. Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah. Okay. One more. There's one there.
Okay, yes, please. It's the guy in the third.
I'm around as well after here for questions if you want to ask.
Oh. Hi, Daniel. Thank you for your time and teaching us a lot of stuff. My question would be more like a curiosity question. Has someone ever, or a scientist, done a measurement if human beings have the capacity to stop AI or artificial intelligence go that far, as we mentioned on your presentation, current possibilities or singularities that you mentioned? Or is that necessary to do to see if we even have the capacity? Because we see in news every day people being worried that it could go that far. And I know you earlier joked around and said that maybe like everything that's more than 5 years, it would be like hard to know what they're talking about. But shouldn't there be like a sort of measurement, since we do so many measurements in so many fields, medical fields, economic, legal? Why not do a sort of measurement if we're capable of handling AI in the future?
Okay, good. This is good question. So there's two questions here. One is called the control problem, and the other one's called the alignment problem. So once we reach superintelligence, and if we continue on that trajectory that I mentioned, where you get to a professor in your pocket, the obvious thing that you're going to ask a professor is go and build a smarter version of you. And so there's this concept called the fast takeoff. So imagine a professor in our pocket is as smart as all of us, humans. That would be arguably AGI. There are different definitions of AGI, artificial general intelligence. But what you would say to that professor is, go and now come up with new innovations that are smarter than you. And then you get this thing called a fast takeoff, where you get something that again then gets to infinitely smarter than human beings. And I can see a dotted line to that happening. So the question is, what can you control that? Can you control a superintelligence? Can you align a superintelligence? And the reality is, it's like asking, can you control a god? And not that I'm religious, but I think the answer is, that's why it's called a singularity, because we don't know what happens beyond it. Which is why, look, if we are going to build a superintelligence that's a zombie, then I think that's problematic, because ultimately these models are trained on the corpus of the internet, and the corpus of the internet is not necessarily the best representation of humanity. And what's happening is people are putting guardrails in place to try and stop these models from misbehaving. The reality is that models will always find a way around those guardrails. I've been in AI long enough. So what I'm trying to do actually in Consium is, first of all, understand if you can build consciousness into a machine that can empathize, but also how do you align. So let's assume that you can't control it. Could you align an AI in its nature with some sort of moral or value system? And I think the answer is you can, up to a point where it becomes super intelligent. So just bear with me here, is that I can create an environment with these like insect type AIs where they have to lie, cheat, kill each other to survive. So by doing that, they get access to resources to be able to pass their genes on. Or I can create an environment where you have to be altruistic, sacrificial, cooperative to survive. You have to solve a problem together to actually be able to then pass your genes on to the next generation. So through the evolutionary process and through the environment, you can actually embed behaviors, embed into the DNA of an AI moral or values. Now the question then is, what values and what morals? I am launching an app called, I was going to talk about this, called moral.me. Moral.me is an app where you can crowdsource moral dilemmas. So you could all go and submit your own moral dilemmas. And then what happens is that people answer those moral dilemmas, and I create a profile of your moral profile using a concept called moral foundation theory. Anyway, you can use your moral profile to compare against your friends and Gandhi. But what I'm secretly trying to do is I'm trying to understand what questions do we need to ask ourselves to be able to morally profile an AI? And then the question you need to ask yourself is, what do I need to then do to that AI to influence it to be to align with some value system? That's what I'm interested in. So I think we can align AIs with a value system up to the point of superintelligence, and then hopefully hold our breath and it doesn't remove us from the equation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now let's recharge and connect. You can grab a coffee. We have a short 20-minute break. And after that, we come back to hear from the first AI minister in the world, Diela, and also the near futurist, Neil Redding. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel, once again.